You're watching East Asia tonight on CNA. Now, ASEAN's position on US-China rivalry has tipped towards Beijing for the first time in recent years. Well, that's according to results of a survey by the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore released earlier this month. And here are some highlights of the survey results.
Choose a side, US or China. Is the US a reliable strategic partner? Why do you distrust China? Questions posed to some 2,000 participants across ASEAN. The respondents come from one of 5 groups: academia, private sector, civil society, government, and regional or global organizations. The yearly poll was launched in 2019 and the question of choosing US or China was posed from 2020. And for the first time this year, the study found a notable shift in sentiments towards China. More than half picked China over the US if ASEAN were forced to align with either one, compared to 38.9% from the year before. Optimism of future ties with China is also rising. More than 51% anticipates ASEAN's relations with China will improve. Now that's compared to just under 39% last year. But there's an uptick among respondents who feel China won't do the right thing to contribute to global peace and security. Now, one thing to note, the survey did not define what doing the right thing means. And out of the bloc's 11 dialogue partners, participants ranked China as most strategically relevant to ASEAN, a score of 8.98 out of 11. The US follows closely behind. More ASEAN respondents are starting to lose confidence in the US as a strategic partner. Confidence in the US to do the right thing to contribute to global peace and security has also dipped this year, although the perception of trust remains strong. The respondents also feel that US engagement with Southeast Asia under the Biden administration has decreased. The top 3 geopolitical concerns among ASEAN: the Israel-Hamas conflict, aggression in the South China Sea, followed by the Russia-Ukraine war.
And for more, we are joined by 2 guests this evening. Mr. Choi Shing Kwok, Director and CEO of ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, the think tank behind this survey, as well as Professor Siu-Kai of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Now, Professor Lau's expertise includes Chinese politics. Well, warm welcome, gentlemen. So let's just start with, just a big picture from both of you. Perhaps we'll start with you first, Mr. Choi. With ASEAN's tilt towards China amid the superpower rivalry, just a quick response from you. Did this come as a surprise, or it has already been building up?
I would say it is a surprise, and yet it's not a surprise. It's a surprise in the sense that the actual numbers that changed over this year is quite a big number compared to last year. So the movement was a bit of a surprise. The magnitude of the movement was a bit of a surprise. But in a way, I think some of the negative things that have been building up on the US side may have been making this much more foreseeable. So in that sense, it wasn't a surprise. Mm-hmm. On the whole, I would say that it would have happened sooner or later. I wouldn't really say that the Chinese, in this case, have become favorites. They more or less have come from behind to become equal and slightly edged ahead. So that's how I would see in perspective the result from this year.
So, Professor Lau, let's bring you in. I mean, was it the same thing for you with the magnitude of the numbers that has, jumped quite a fair bit? I mean, did that surprise you?
Well, I'm not really surprised. But in fact, I think still the Asian, Southeast Asian elites have better impression of the United States than China.
Oh, okay.
But China seems to become up very fast, given the fact that China pays a lot of attention to Southeast Asia and that the China cultural influence on Southeast Asia seems to be increasing. And in fact, I would say that China pays much more attention and puts more importance on Southeast Asia than the United States. And as the trend goes, I think China influence, particularly China's soft power, will increase moderately, but consistently in the days ahead in Southeast Asia.
Right. So, Mr. Choi, let's look at the profile of the respondents. Majority of them, correct me if I'm wrong, they're from the business sector. How much of that do you think perhaps could have influenced the way China is being viewed in the survey?
Okay, I think that it is not a majority. The largest group of the survey respondents are from the business sector, but compared to the number, the proportion from last year, is actually an increase of about 9%, not that much. So we're talking about 34% of the respondents coming from the business sector compared to last year, which was in the 20s. So I would not say that the change in the proportion of the respondents actually made a big difference. If you look at where the increase in the private sector business people came from, they really come just from 3 countries. That's Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. And for these countries, Laos and Myanmar, there was, of course, a predisposition towards China, some movement of the preference for China, but for Vietnam there wasn't. So I would say that the proportion of the respondents actually doesn't really make a difference to the overall change in what we see today in the results. It is other factors, and I can go into that if you want me to. I would say there are 2 factors.
Give us the top factor, or the top 2 factors.
Okay. So I would say that the top 2 factors, one is the Israel-Hamas war, which played a big part in, I think, setting the backdrop for this particular survey. The survey was taken in January, February this year, and it comes during the period when the Israel-Hamas war was at the stage in which I would say that Israel had begun to wage the war in such a way that it was kind of breaching international humanitarian principles. And so there was a reaction from, I think, all around the world, but certainly also from Southeast Asia. So that's the first factor in my mind. The second factor has to do with the US itself. So I think that the US has, kind of disillusioned Southeast Asia in the last year. A number of different reasons. Of course, there's the usual, which is that...
so I see what you're hearing, Mr. Choi. You're saying that obviously the U.S. and what's happening in the Middle East crisis, that has actually, stirred sentiments. Professor Lau, let's bring you back in here again. I just want to talk about, you'd be best placed to tell us in terms of, I guess, China's reading into these findings. And I guess, how are their calculations going to be now? Whether is it towards the South China Sea or cross-strait relations, Professor?
Well, I think China seems to be quite enthusiastic about wooing the Southeast Asia. But the problem is that the maritime conflict in the South China Sea might affect China's relationship with Southeast Asian countries, particularly the Philippines, Vietnam, as well as Brunei. But that kind of thing cannot be eliminated in the relationship between these countries. But I think China is taking a more moderate approach now, in the sense that China tries not to stir up trouble with these countries over the South China Sea maritime conflict. But on the other hand, I think that China has to face the reality that the United States is trying to stir up the Philippines against China, and that is something which cannot be avoided in the future. But in any case, I think from China's point of view, given the importance of Southeast Asia to China as well, particularly in the Belt and Road Initiative, I think China will try as far as possible to improve relationship with Southeast Asian countries, particularly in the sense that try to maintain the neutrality between the United States and China.
Yeah. So, Mr. Choi, let's just talk about, there was, I guess, initial optimism that this whole ASEAN engagement with the U.S. under a post-Trump administration would be increased. There was momentum of some high-level visits. We've seen that at the start of President Biden's term. Yet ASEAN feels that the engagement has decreased. Why is that so?
I think that is the result this year. It was a change from last year. In effect, the proportions reversed. About 40% felt that it's reduced, 25% thought that it's increased. Last year was the opposite, 25-40 instead. So I think it moves from year to year. The last 1 year, as far as the US is concerned, I think it has caused some disillusionment to Southeast Asia's respondents. One, because I think that President Biden hadn't been attending the ASEAN and its related meetings last year, even though he engaged them in the APEC summit and so on in other meetings. But that, I think, has some issue because ASEAN ministers and ASEAN leaders place a lot on FaceTime, right? They place a lot of emphasis on FaceTime. I think the other issue is the evolution of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Agreement. It had been something that I think the US laid down as something that was going to be its response to, for example, China's Belt and Road Initiative. But I think it has not panned out as it intended. And I think particularly the digital pillar coming kind of up against resistance domestically in the US, and it's being kind of now downplayed. I think that's a big disappointment to Southeast Asia.
So we still have to watch out, especially when the US elections comes around. Well, thank you very much to you both, gentlemen. I was speaking to Mr. Choi Shing Kwok, Director and CEO of ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, and Emeritus Professor Siu-Kai of the Chinese University of Hong Kong.